All right, today we are diving deep into one of the most famous political hits in all of human history. We're going to pick apart the conspiracy that targeted the most powerful man on the planet, Julius Caesar. And this wasn't just a plot hatched in the Senate. It was born in the minds of men who were supposed to be his friends, fueled by jealousy and ambition. A danger, it turns out, that Caesar himself could actually feel coming, even if he didn't know exactly where from.
And get this, those are Caesar's own words, recorded by the historian Plutarch. He saw that look, that hungry, resentful look in the eyes of guys like Cassius. He just had no idea how deep that resentment really went, or just how far they were willing to go. This one quote really sets the tone for this whole story of paranoia, betrayal, and a fate that, just maybe, could have been avoided.
So to really understand this conspiracy, we first have to understand the man they were targeting and the world that he basically built around himself. See, Rome was finally at peace after these awful civil wars, and Caesar was the man on top, the undisputed winner. He held all the cards.
Now that title, dictator, that's where the trouble really starts. In the Roman Republic, being a dictator was a real job, but it was temporary. It was an emergency measure, right? You got the job for 6 months to fix a crisis, then you give the power back. But perpetual dictator, that was something totally new, and frankly terrifying to the old Roman aristocracy. It meant his power had no expiration date. He was a king in every single way except for the actual title, and the very idea of a king was absolute poison in Rome.
And all this power, well, it started to change him. It started to breed a kind of arrogance. Plutarch tells this story about one specific moment that was just deeply insulting to the Senate. A whole delegation of senators and top officials came to tell him about all these honors they'd voted for him. And Caesar, he didn't even stand up. He just stayed seated, talking to the most powerful men in the Republic like they were his servants. That one act of disrespect, man, it was a huge deal. It was a signal that the old ways, the traditions of the Republic, they didn't mean much to him anymore.
All this tension just kind of boiled over at the Feast of Lupercalia. Now this was this ancient, wild festival, and it turned out to be the perfect backdrop for a little bit of political drama. Picture it. Caesar's sitting there on a golden chair, watching everything, when his right-hand man, Mark Antony, walks up to him. The whole city is watching. This wasn't just some ceremony. This was a test of the waters.
So Antony holds up a diadem, the headband that was a symbol of a king, and offers it to Caesar. A couple of Caesar's guys in the crowd cheer, but it's kind of weak. But then, when Caesar pushes the crown away, the entire crowd just erupts, roaring with approval. So Antony, he tries again. Same thing happens. The people of Rome made it very, very clear. They were not ready to trade their republic for a king.
The message for Caesar was pretty straightforward, right? He saw the reaction, he knew he had to say no, and he ordered the crown to be taken away to a temple. But for his enemies who were watching all this from the sidelines, they saw something completely different. To them, this was all just a show, a calculated performance. The fact that he even let it happen proved what they feared all along. He wanted to be king, and that made him a tyrant that had to be stopped.
So with Caesar's ambition now seemingly out in the open, those whispers against him started getting a whole lot louder. And right at the center of all those whispers was a guy driven by something way more personal than politics, Gaius Cassius Longinus.
Cassius was really the architect of this whole thing. Publicly, his whole pitch was that this was a noble act, right? We have to save the Republic. But Plutarch tells us the truth was a lot uglier. Cassius had a private quarrel with Caesar. He didn't hate the tyranny, he hated the tyrant. He was just eaten up with jealousy for a man who had climbed so much higher than he ever could.
But here's the thing. Cassius was sharp. He was a clever political operator. He knew that a conspiracy that was just based on his personal beef was never going to fly. It would just look like a petty revenge killing. If this was going to work, the plot needed to look legitimate. It needed a hero. It needed a name that just screamed republic and freedom.
And that's when Cassius turned his attention to the one man whose name, whose reputation, could turn a back-alley murder into a righteous cause. He needed Marcus Junius Brutus. And right here, is where we see Caesar's greatest and, as it turns out, his most fatal miscalculation. He trusted Brutus. Plutarch tells us that Caesar once said he wasn't really worried about the ambitious, power-hungry guys. He trusted that Brutus, because he was such a virtuous man, would just patiently wait for his turn at power.
He believed Brutus would look for this skin, meaning, he'd wait for Caesar to die of old age. He never, ever imagined Brutus would be the one to come and take it from him.
So why Brutus? Why was he the key to all of this? It was his name. His ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, was a legend. He was the guy who founded the Roman Republic by kicking out the last tyrannical king hundreds of years earlier. So to have a Brutus leading the charge against a new so-called king, well, that gave the whole conspiracy the moral authority it desperately, desperately needed.
So to get him on board, Cassius starts this brilliant and frankly ruthless psychological campaign. He just keeps poking at Brutus's sense of duty, at his family pride. But the really insidious part, these anonymous notes that started showing up. Imagine Brutus sitting in his official chair as a judge and finding these little messages. You are asleep, Brutus. You are not a true Brutus. They were designed to shame him, to make him question his own courage. They were forcing him to choose between his friend, Caesar, and what he was told was his family's destiny, to protect the Republic.
Now this is where the story gets really, really strange. As this human plot is taking shape in the shadows of Rome, it's almost like the gods, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, started trying to sound an alarm. The world itself started filling up with these terrifying signs and omens.
Plutarch, our guide for this whole story, makes it really clear that the days leading up to the Ides of March were not quiet. The air in Rome was thick with dread, and the line between just political nervousness and actual supernatural terror, it started to get really blurry. It was as if the universe itself knew something terrible was about to go down.
And we're not talking about just a bad feeling here. Plutarch lists these concrete, chilling events. People saw these weird fires in the sky. Ghosts were apparently seen just gliding through the city streets. And the strangest one of all, a single, eerie-looking bird showed up in the middle of the bustling forum at noon. I mean, these signs were impossible to ignore, and they just added to this citywide feeling that something awful was on its way.
So by the morning of March 15th, 44 BC, the stage is completely set. The conspirators are ready, the supernatural warnings have been delivered, and Caesar, ignoring every single one of them, gets ready to walk to the Senate House for the very last time. So what we have here is this perfect storm of human action meeting supernatural warning. You've got the cold, calculating jealousy of Cassius, the tormented soul of Brutus, and an entire city just buzzing with fear and rumors. Every single warning, from his wife's nightmares to the fortune tellers, Caesar just brushed them all aside. His destiny was calling.
And we're going to end on this haunting line from Plutarch. It really makes you ask the ultimate question, right? Was Caesar's death just inevitable? Was he a victim of fate? Or did his own arrogance and his fatal blind trust in a man named Brutus ultimately seal his own doom? It's a question that just reminds you that even the most powerful person in the world can't outrun history.